Make it. There we go. There we are. Okay. All right. Well, welcome back. I'm Ryan with Sinister Scripts Podcast, and welcome to another edition of Sinister Madness. I am joined. Oh, my computer just closed. Sorry. Thought my computer was breaking down here. Whoa. Technical difficulties. I am joined by Matthew Myers of Horror Madness. You can find him at Horror Madness 0055, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And you may recognize his face. He's been on here before, but we decided to make this a more of a regular thing. And so David can't join us today. He's dealing with some family stuff that's going on. So this is just a fun little segment, but we wish David the best, and he is with us in spirit. So, and the movie that we came together to talk about is one of the greatest creature features of all time. I'll let Matthew introduce it.
We are talking about Jaws.
Yes. Jaws, which I've now watched twice in the past 2 days to try to get ready and try to, look up all the little pieces of trivia. And I tell you what, this movie is probably, if there was a highest rewatchability factor scale for me, this would be at the top of it. I watch this movie every time it's on TV. I can join at minute one. I can join in the middle. I could join at the end. I'm still going to watch it.
Oh, absolutely. It's probably the movie that got me into creature features. And I will say this, the reason I won't go more than 10 feet into the ocean.
Still not an ocean guy, huh?
No, 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 not at all. I love to look at it from afar.
Listen. I completely understand and appreciate that. My mom is from northern Florida, not ocean Florida, more of like northern central of the state. But in Florida, you're never far from the ocean. And she told me, she was like, "Listen, when this movie came out, like you don't understand what it did to people who live near the ocean. Like
Yep.
it was something that definitely put fear into people, and to this day you're almost kind of still looking over your shoulder a little bit. And I would be lying if I said that when every year we go down to Destin for my daughter's fall break, and when I'm in the ocean with her, I'm like, I don't want to go too far out, and it's always in the back of my mind. Like probably not going to get attacked by a shark, but there's always a chance. You are in the ocean.
Yeah, right. Well, it's funny because Jaws and I share a very special day, and every year I watch this movie because Jaws is came out on my birthday. So
That's cool.
it came out on June 20th, 1975, and my birthday is June 20th, 1981. So each year I celebrate by watching Jaws. So that's another reason why I absolutely adore this movie is obviously we're birthday twins in that aspect. So I there's just so much love and adoration for this movie and so many reasons to like it. But yeah, see, I'm like you. I go to Florida a lot, and I have a massive appreciation of the ocean from the sand.
It's so beautiful. And yeah, now listen, you watch it on your birthday, and that's cool. That's awesome that you share a birthday with Jaws release date. That's pretty awesome. I watch it. It's my July 4th movie. Every 4th of July, because of when it takes place in the film, it's my July 4th watch. And it usually kind of coincides roughly around Shark Week, which Shark Week is a big week in our house. My daughter loves anything to do with the ocean and sharks. So when I told her there was an entire week associated with sharks and learning about sharks, and she was like, whoa, she's like, you mean they're not just mindless eating machines? And I'm like, you know what? They're not. Contrary to what Hollywood might have you believe, there is a lot we don't know about sharks. So she's all in, which is fun because, growing up, I wanted to be a marine biologist. That was what I wanted to do. And then I realized you have to, one, live near the ocean for that, which I don't or didn't at the time and still don't. I'm living, Georgia. So, and then second of all, it's a lot of school that I just was not. I mean, I liked science, but it wasn't my thing. It wasn't my thing. I switched to IT, but anyway, I digress. So let's dive into Jaws a little bit. I feel like we're talking about a movie from 1975, and I kind of broke this up into what I call like three parts of this movie. The first part is kind of the build up, the character development, and then the second part is kind of the preparation for the encounter, or like the search for the killer shark, and then you kind of got the last segment, which is like the confrontation with Bruce. And we'll for those of you who aren't familiar, we'll tell you who Bruce is shortly. But this movie, first of all, I love like little seaside beach towns. I think they are so awesome, and I think that they did a great job. Obviously, this movie is set in a fictional town of Amity Island, which actually in real life was shot at Martha's Vineyard. They
Yep.
wanted that feel. I was reading Spielberg wanted the feel of a kind of a sleepy seaside town, and they wanted to use was it not Long Island? What like the Hamptons, Long Island, but it was too busy. There was too much going on, and so he chose Martha's Vineyard. It had a lot less going on, and it turned out to be a smart choice.
Yeah, that's what I think I liked about this movie. Like, amid all the issues behind the scenes, how he did this movie was genius. Like, yeah, the three parts. Like, it's almost like when people talk about the three acts in a movie.
Hmm.
Yes, the setup, the preparation, and then the final showdown. Like
Correct.
this movie just works so beautifully in how it's all prepared, and the introductions of the characters. It's like, and this is funny, for years, how they said, I used to call him Roy Schneider for years, and it probably took me about 40 years before I realized it's Roy Scheider. But it's like,
I
but
did the same
anyways,
thing.
but it's like, it's funny to say that, it just, yeah, the slow, it's like, then you got Hooper that comes in, and then you got Quint that comes in, and it's all working masterfully. And then but yeah, the beginning with Amity Island and the vacation town, and you're introducing this New York cop who just wants to really just kind of fade away into a
Exactly.
vacation town that has a low crime rate,
Correct.
and he doesn't expect what's about to happen. Like,
Exactly. I love everything. Like my one of my favorite scenes is when he wakes up in the morning and he's like, the sun's coming in through this window. The sun didn't used to come in through this window. And she's like, well, we moved into this house in the fall. It's the summer now. And then he's like, yeah, he's like, I gotta go get the kids. What do you say? I gotta get the kids out of the yard. And she's like, it's the yard. He's like, yeah, the yard. He's like, I'm gonna have to go out by the car. And she's like, yeah, and you're a real New Yorker now. So it's just kind of funny. Like it really made you feel like it almost the beginning of this movie almost makes you feel comfortable. I feel like they get you comfortable and then they make you uncomfortable. And so like Spielberg was definitely a master. And yes, we'll talk a little bit about all the problems behind the scenes because they had many issues with this movie. But I think you nailed it. They had the cop from New York City wants to slow life down. He's got his family. He moves upstate to a quiet town where he thinks nothing's going to happen. And the first thing that happens on his job is they find this severed arm on the beach. And so he starts to immediately, and I was telling Melissa, my wife, last night. I was like, he jumped to shark like real quick, like not jumped the shark, but jumped to shark real quick. But she's like, well, what else would it be? And I was like, well, maybe a boating accident. And she's like, you sound just like the mayor. And I was like, listen, because you have to understand, I see both sides. I see him being like, we've got to be careful and we got to protect people, which was what he jumped to immediately. But I also see like this is a town where like their entire like they make their nut in the summer. Like that's their entire livelihood of being a
yep,
tourist town where you're bringing in people from the city and these surrounding areas and you have these beautiful beaches. That's where you make your money. And if not, I think Quint even mentioned it. He's like, y'all want to pay me what I want, or you want to live off welfare for the next year because people
yep,
aren't going to come here. So I see both sides, but I also feel like this is my first introduction to like the evil empire that is like local government. And I don't know. Have you read this book?
I have not.
Okay. I highly recommend it because there are some subtle differences. Like, for example, in the book, there's a mob element, like a New York mob element into like the politics behind Amity Island. Like in the movie, he didn't want to close the beaches because of it's going to impact the economy, right? In the
Yeah.
book, there was that, but there was like a bunch of mob input of like, you can't close the beaches because they're making money off of it too. So it's a little bit of an interesting twist that they throw in there. But I also think that like it was my first introduction into like, you know what? Like, fuck them politicians. Like, they don't care about anyone except for themselves and making money. And he was, and you can kind of see it. Remember the scene where he drives the his onto the ferry, and
Yep.
they pull up behind him in the Cadillac, and like four dudes get out of the car. Like, this is definitely a good old boys club, right? That's the local government behind Amity Island, and they're concerned about all their own interests. And even the one guy was like, "Oh, don't worry, like I'll bury this on page 6 by the grocery ads." Like whenever the young girl was killed in the opening scene. Um, but before we get too far ahead, I feel like I could talk about this movie for days.
Yep.
The opening scene is fucking chef's kiss, right? You've got the teenagers drinking bonfire on the beach, and then one of the girl decides, Chrissy, right? Chrissy is her name, decides she wants to go swimming, skinny dipping, and the one dude is too drunk to get his clothes off. He passes out on the beach, which good for him because she swims out and is attacked by our shark early in the movie. And I was just thinking, like how like was watching it again, like it's fresh in my mind. That that scene is terrifying.
Yep.
With her be like just ragdolled through the water and screaming and making it to the buoy, like one of the most iconic opening scenes in horror that I can remember.
But see, that poses that question. And I've had this question posed to me many, many years as a horror fan. When people, and especially in my lives or questions as a horror fan, is if Jaws is a horror movie or not. And you talk about that opening horror scene. So you're running out. You think some young man is going to come out with you. You go skinny dipping in the dark, and you're out there lurking across this dark water, and something snags you and starts to tear you apart. What's more horrifying than that?
Thank
And
you.
as you slowly get pulled under and chewed to bits,
Right.
like I mean that's terrifying.
Yes.
And also, I want to add on to that as you were talking about when he walks up on the young lady on the beach.
Yeah.
Uh, Spielberg, as a nice touch, said that the prop arm that you see in that scene looked not as genuine to him, that he actually brought a cast member. So it was actually one of the crew members' arms that was there. So it was a real crew member instead of a prop arm that you see
You
there.
just bury them.
Yeah, they just buried him in there to make it look more realistic in that
Oh
scene.
wow.
So kudos to practical effects, Mr. Spielberg.
Yeah, listen, yeah, to your point, that this is 100% horror. I know a lot of people are like, "Oh, is this horror? Is that horror?" It's very, subjective. Like what I think horror is like short, horrifying, like terrifying, scary, right? Like there's nothing scarier to me than like things that can really happen. And
Absolutely.
with a lot of these, this is I would put this in a category of like when animals attack, whether it's a bear or a shark or a tiger or whatever. But this can really happen. It does happen. It happens every year where people are attacked by sharks. Now, granted, not a 25-foot great white shark most of the time, right? But the idea that this is something that can really happen, and this is why you won't get in the ocean because it could really happen. So I think that opening scene was terrifying. I also read that the Chrissy was not an actor. She was a swimwear model that Spielberg or someone saw and was like, "We should get her to do it." And they're like, "Well, she's not an actor." And they're like, "Well, so what? Look at her." like, she's like a beach babe, perfect for the role, like fits the role of being that. And so that's how she kind of got cast in there, which was fun. So you were introduced to that scene, like you said, she gets pulled under, and we're like, okay, title card, right? Jaws. And then we get all this backstory, right? We're like, this is the tourist town, and this is our how we make our living. And he jumps immediately to. I love the scene when he's like, "Hey, where are the beach closed signs?" And the deputy's like, "We don't have any of those. We've never had to close the beaches." And so I think it kind of sets up this tone for what's happening in the movie. Like this is uncharted territory, uncharted water. If you know, if have you, but like. So they're having to deal with a situation they've never had to deal with, and so they're like, "Oh, this is a one-off scenario. It's just some, city kid that came in, had too much to drink, had trouble swimming. Boat comes by. Maybe it's a boating accident. Let's move past this." But Martin, the sheriff, is not quite convinced, and so decides to bring in um, Richard Dreyfuss's character. What was his name?
Hooper.
Hooper. Hoop, Mr. Hooper. Yeah, so brings in him from like the National Oceanic Institute to check out the remains and figure out what are we dealing with, right? So I feel like Martin's making all the right choices. He really is. He's
Yep.
trying to find out if this is something he needed to worry about. And this is it's so funny how the first half of this movie is like man versus government. You know what I mean?
Well, it is there's so many things like the terror of like how society can change,
Hmm.
and then what's absolute like one of the after the opening scene, one of the most chilling parts is when Hooper does that autopsy. Just like as young as Dreyfus is in his acting career in this movie, when he's doing that autopsy and he's drinking that water and he's just breaking it down and he's like, this is absolutely not a boating accident. Who said this happened? And it's
Yeah.
just like that's a master class for how young he is in that part. And he's just like, this was absolutely a shark, and look at the bite radius and all this stuff, and he's
Hmm.
breaking it down, and just like in that scene, like you feel that scene and
Yeah.
you're like, okay, what are we about to go on right here? What are we
Yeah.
signing up for? And it just how Spielberg quickly changes the tone in this movie. And
Hmm.
that part right there is just like, okay, we're signing on for something truly special. And
Yes.
I love that part of the movie. And then like you said, the buildup. And then this is where, yeah, we start to really start getting into what you said, like the second part, the
Hmm.
preparation phase, and it's really starting to build up to, what are we leading into now?
Right.
And
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, 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 you're good. You're good. You're good. I was gonna second exactly what you said about the autopsy scene because I think the look on his face when he pulls out that little bucket and he looks like this is it, like this is all that's left of this body, like it genuine and then you see like just like the hand and he's explaining like where the most of the torso is missing and where the it was dissected here at the shoulder and he's like it's a large squalus larger than normal for these waters and he's like you're dealing with a great white, like that was those words were like dun dun dun, like you're dealing with a great white. And I want to stop there, and I also want to talk a little. I kind of glazed over it, but the score, the
Okay.
infamous Jaws music that starts at the beginning, that we get through the attack, like that set the tone, and you kind of like have it, throughout the entire film. And I think the funniest thing to me is John Williams did the music for this, who is a fucking legend,
Yep.
and Spielberg said when he said, "Hey, what do you got for me?" and John Williams played the Jaws theme for him, and he said he's like I laughed, and I was like, "This is it. This is what you came up with for Jaws," and it was like he didn't like it, and then it came out being what I would consider the most single identifiable music in movie history, maybe. Like anyone hears that theme, that dun 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 dun, everyone knows what it is. Everyone knows you're talking about a shark movie. Everyone knows you're talking about Jaws. So it's funny to me that like what started out as like, what else you got, turned into this like monumental like movie sound.
Absolutely. When Spielberg was interviewed about that and said that, and you're not a horror fan, you know what that is.
Exactly.
It's synonymous with cinema. Like,
Yes.
and kudos to John Williams. Kudos that it made it on the movie. Like, it made his career, and it fits the movie. It's simplistic and it's beautiful and it works. And it's fitting, and
Yes.
it's I mean absolutely amazing.
I,
And
I
it,
100% agree. It's like I couldn't imagine the movie with a different soundtrack or a different like different music. I couldn't imagine it. Like it's almost like hey, take the movie, dub it, take that sound out and put in different. I feel like it doesn't have the same impact. And maybe that's because we're all so familiar with what it is, but I still it just seems like this was meant to be like peanut butter and jelly, right? These were meant to go together. Um but yeah, so I had to bring that up because I was like, man, like every time I hear that, I could have my back to the TV, and if I hear that opening scene, I know exactly what's happening. I can visualize it in my mind. Um, so that's probably one of the most, you know, pieces that people know, like recognize the most from this movie, I think is the sound, which is funny. It's like not even the movie itself, it's just the music for it. But anyway, we digress. But so we have the autopsy, and so we decide that we're dealing with a shark here. And so now we're introduced to what I think is one of the best introductions to a character in movie history, and that's when we're introduced to Quint, right? The town hall gathers, and so you've got like it looks like they're all gathered in like the schoolyard, the school building, that's used for two purposes, and they got the mayor and a bunch of townsfolk, and they're like, "What are we going to do about this potential shark?" And they're like, "We're offering a reward, $3,000 to catch the shark." And they're all arguing and they're arguing, and you get that infamous just the where you and then Quint is dragging his nails down the chalkboard, and he is so captivating. I cannot get over Robert Shaw and his delivery of this character. You look at him and it screams boat captain. He's got everything and he's like, y'all know me, y'all know what I do for a living. You know, we're not talking about a little dogfish. We're talking about a shark will swallow you whole. And like he paints this picture, and then he's like, all right, I'll find your shark for you. I'll find him for 3,000. I'll kill him for 10,000. You'll get the head, the tail, the whole damn thing. Like that whole delivery, man, dude. I was like, yes, let's go catch. I'll get in the boat. Let's go catch this shark. You know what I mean? It was almost like this rah call, but in true like political like bullshit, they don't want to pay the man.
Yep.
They're like,
They,
nah, we can do it cheaper. Well, and we're gonna see where that gets them. When you have every local Yahoo getting in a boat and trying to catch this killer shark. So
there is an absolute funny moment. Speaking of Jaws, I have probably watched this movie 30, 40 times in my lifetime. I've watched Jaws so many times. And I agree. The introduction to Quint, which is such a slept on character in cinema,
oh yeah.
he does that opening scene, which is iconic. He walks out like a boss. And I
Yeah.
question anyone who has watched this movie multiple times. And he walks out with his buddy, this little guy with a dog. Okay? All right. And I'm having you question. See?
Yeah.
Because my hamster in the wheel does it every time I watch that movie. Okay?
Yeah.
Go back and watch that. Where's his partner the rest of that movie? He walks out with a guy with a dog, and that guy is never to be seen again in that movie. And as many times as I've watched that movie, it still makes me laugh. Like,
It's like he went in there and he was like, he cut his partner out. He's like, no, I want the whole 10K.
yeah, he's like, he was so aggressive. He's like, nah, that 10K is mine. But that guy is in that movie, and I swear to God, no one ever has questioned that but me.
Maybe he got cut. He was like, you're like, yeah. Maybe he was one of the other Yahoos on like the local boat captains that went out. So, but I never even noticed. I'm gonna have to go back and watch that now and see this. But yeah, he gets up and he's like, Mayor, Chief, ladies and gentlemen, and then just deuces out. Like, come to me whenever you have a bigger like. And so yeah, so now we get the scenes where there's this $3,000 reward, and so every local hillbilly in the area they show them piling up in boats, and even the chief's like, we got more people than we can count, like we are trying to keep people safe. They're all dumping blood and carcasses in the water, trying to chum up the ocean, and they catch the shark. But before they catch a shark, I love the scene where Brody is like, "Hey, how many guys are you gonna put in that boat?" And then he's like, "Hey, Hooper, tell them they can't have that many guys in the boat." And so Hooper's like, "Hey, the chief wants me to tell you you can't have that many guys in the boat." And they're like, "Yeah, whatever, buddy." And he's like, "Well, you know where I can find a good restaurant or a good hotel?" And they're like, "Yeah, just walk straight." Like out into the ocean. And he goes, "Ha ha ha, they're all gonna die."
Iconic. That part is iconic. I even like a little earlier in the scene when his deputy walks in, he's like, go out and talk to your people. It's like, those aren't my people. Have you looked at all the license plates out
Yeah.
there? It's like
Like they're from everywhere coming in to like try to catch this shark. So there's so many great one-liners and so many great scenes, but you got the deputy and Chief Brody trying to like control this chaos of all these people loading up with and then Brody's taking dynamite, like, oh no, you can't take that. One guy's got an armful of dynamite, and he's like, you can't take that out there. So these guys go out and they catch and they kill a shark, and they're all relieved because we killed the man eater. It was a tiger. It was a big shark, tiger shark. And Hooper is immediately like, looking at the mouth. He's like, I don't think the bite radius matches the wounds on the little boy, which we kind of glazed over because they opened up the beaches, right? And little Alex Kinter and his mother are at the beach, and he gets attacked and he gets killed by our shark, the great white shark. And so that's when they close down everything, they call in Quint, and then they think they caught this shark. And he's like, the bite radius doesn't match, and he's like, I want to do an autopsy. And of course the mayor's like, I can't have that poor Kinter boy spilling out over the boardwalk right here in front of everyone, so he doesn't want him to even do the autopsy. And they just write it off as, we caught the shark and we're going to reopen the beaches, which, dumb move, but I get it. Like, they need a trophy, you need something to put the people's mind at ease, and they think that they've got it.
Well, if you want to talk about a way to go out, like that kid is out there just living his best life.
Woo.
And, old Bruce goes out on the edge of the ocean. He swims past all those guys and he selects poor old Alex Kittner. And, man, when he takes him off that float, just that pool of blood. And, I think you said it best when we were talking last night. Put him through the blender, like.
Yeah,
I mean, like,
absolutely. Like, and the funny thing is, I read that scene was supposed to be much more graphic. Like, you kind of see it from, like, as if you're looking out to the ocean, and you kind of see like some little bit of like blood water kind of spewing up. But apparently, it was supposed to be like much more like the camera's right there. But they had some problems with, I don't know if people were gonna respond well to a child, being dismembered by a shark in 1975, right? Fast forward to 2024, where we've got Art the Clown just freaking whacking people, whacking kids in their sleep. So it changed a lot, but yeah. But I would have liked to see the original cut. Interestingly enough.
well, and that's what I think the beauty of the imagery in that movie, like, I think how Spielberg ultimately, or, obviously whoever was filming it, was how they captured it. Like the scene where it pans out and the people on the island or on the beach are actually seeing it as it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And then the panic as everyone's running off the out of the ocean and everything like that. And, you know, it really shows again societal tendencies, like in a panic, like what is it that people say nowadays, and it's kind of funny, it's like fuck them kids. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
these, I mean, they're stealing the tubes from the kids,
Yes,
and like they're
flipping them
running,
like,
I'm like running them down.
yeah.
And it's like, we're getting out of the water, forget you got a wife or a mom and their child like sitting in the water while everyone's running out, like they're
Mm-hmm.
panicking. You have the people that go into shock, and like you're seeing all different kinds of emotions in that scene, and it was captured beautifully. Like, it's
Agree.
beautiful. And there's so many working elements in this movie that again just make it what I think is a masterpiece.
I agree. I agree. And the it's the scene where the attack happens and they zoom scene on Brody, right? And his wife is standing behind him. I read that was inspired by Hitchcock. It was a Hitchcock movie thing where like the zoom in, that scene is, and it's become an iconic scene in Jaws, but I've heard that Spielberg was a big fan of how Hitchcock used the camera view. And that's how that scene came about. So I thought that was interesting. And the one more thing, I don't know if you read it too. There was the woman who played Alex's mother was at a restaurant decades after they filmed this movie, and she noticed that they had an Alex Kittner sandwich on the menu. And she said, I played the mother of Alex in the original movie. And out comes the owner of the restaurant, who was Alex, and that was the first time they had seen each other since filming. So like they had this reunion years later in a restaurant and hadn't seen each other. I thought that was kind of a fun story.
Yeah, I saw that. I kind of want to know how much sauce they had on that sandwich.
It had to be ketchup, right? Like we were talking, it had to
Right?
be ketchup, or like yeah, Thousand Island doesn't make the cut. Like maybe French dressing or something. Yeah, or you could do like a chicken parm sandwich and get the tomato sauce.
Right.
But yeah, so I thought that was a funny story. So so back to our storyline where they've killed the shark, and Hooper doesn't think it's the right shark, and then Brody invites Hooper over for dinner, which is also a funny scene where he brings a bottle of red wine and a bottle of white wine. He's like, I didn't know what you were serving, and Brody pours himself that massive pint glass of red wine and then gives Hooper like this little splash. That's the kind of day he had. And then they were like, they got just drunk enough when then Brody's like, well, why don't we go down there and cut open this shark and see what's in there? So they go down to the wharf and they cut the shark open, and that was a fun scene too, where Hooper says, "Hey," he's kind of explaining, just as I thought, swim up from Gulf waters, warmer waters, and he pulls out the Louisiana license plate, and I thought it was fun how they gave a little bit of like education, like, oh, did they eat the whole car? He's like, no, no, tiger sharks, they're like the garbage disposals of the ocean. They'll eat anything. So all that's in the tiger shark is fish and a license plate. So needless to say, the Kinter boy was not in the shark's belly, so they've still got a bigger problem, which I think Hooper's like, we've got a bigger problem. We're gonna get a boat at night and we're gonna go find this shark because he's a night feeder. And of course, Brody being like kind of like you, Matthew, like, I don't want to get in that means I gotta go on the water. He's like, you can do it. And he's like, no, I can't. And he's like, yes, you can. And so this is the scene where they take it out at night and they find the some sunken boat, and he goes night diving, which I love the ocean. I did recently night snorkeling in the Cayman Islands in the bioluminescent water, so it's like Avatar, the water glowed. Let me tell you, being in the ocean at night is terrifying.
Absolutely. I mean, like, if you want to talk about some of the best tension scenes in this movie, they really involve Hooper.
Yeah,
Like, when he goes down in that boat and he's like, oh, yeah, I'm just going to go down there real quick, check
yeah,
it out by myself. I'm like, you moron. I'm
right.
like, and I'm like, I've watched this movie so many times and I'm still cussing him. I'm like, what are you
Yes.
doing?
Well,
And I know the result every time.
yeah.
And I'm like, you're gonna get eaten this time. He's gonna something's gonna change, and that's when you know it's a masterful movie. That you're still after all this time, you're like, son of a bitch is still going down there. Like,
Yep.
what are you doing?
Still gives me anxiety. Yeah, still makes me
Yes.
anxious about it. And that's like and this was really the first quote unquote jump scare of the movie. And it was funny, like when I think Spielberg said when they were screening the movie, they didn't get the reaction they wanted from this scene, so they thought about cutting the scene out completely, because Hooper goes down and he finds a hole in the side of the boat, that's a bite hole, and he finds the big shark tooth, and then you can see the corpse head kind of float up in the hole, and he freaks out. And it's funny to me that it like took him a second. It's almost like he looked at it and then he freaked out. Like it took him and they
Yep.
dropped the tooth and he swam up, and that's when they went to the mayor and they were like, he's like, I pulled a tooth out of the side of that boat that was as big as a shot glass, and it was the tooth of a great white. And of course the mayor's like, oh, can I see that tooth? He's like, well, no, I had an accident, I dropped it. And so of course the mayor doesn't want to believe him, and he's more concerned about the graffiti. Someone graffitied the Amity Island sign with they put a shark on the woman behind the raft and said "Help, shark!" And he's more concerned about, what did he say? He's going to hoist them up by their Buster Browns,
Yeah.
which I still don't know what that means, but, but I'm gonna have to Google that one. But yeah, like so you got this. It's like we're seeing like we mentioned the three parts. We're seeing the kind of the building of this, and you were like evidence after evidence after evidence that's just being ignored. And so we're kind of coming to a head where, like to your point, the showdown where they're gonna have to admit that they have a problem. And so we've got, they don't want to close the beaches. So what do? They open the beaches on the 4th of July, and you see the ferry come in with thousands of people, and everything's kicking off. And I love how they do this. They're like, we've built up all this tension, and now we're going to kind of put you at ease by having this like happy-go-lucky scene. Everyone's at the beach and everyone's buying merchandise. And then I love the scene where the mayor is seeing that no one's going in the water. And he goes up to his buddy and he's like, hey Bill, you're not in the water. And he's like, yeah, well, I just put on some suntan lotion. And he's like, get in the water. And I'm like, fuck you, buddy, you get in the water. Like, we've got two people dead in less than 24 hours. I'm not getting in the water. So of course he goes out in the water, and like you mentioned with society and how society reacts, everyone says, oh, they're fine. So you see all the people running into the water. And we know this is not going to end well, right? Because Chief Brody just told his son, I don't want you going out in the boat. Why don't you go in the pond, which is like a little estuary that goes out into the ocean? It's safer over there. Yeah, okay. And so we're seeing all of this tension kind of, I feel like, come to a head here, where we're going to get the reveal that there's definitely a shark problem, right?
Yeah, and yeah, he does a little bait and switch, you know, and obviously we have the two kids.
Yep.
We have the two kids that go through the main, and it kind of deflects your attention for a second. Brody and everyone goes over there, and then everyone is kind of like, okay, the Coast Guard goes, and oh, we got the two kids. And then you have the young lady who's like, oh my God, over here, shark, shark, and everyone's slow to respond.
Yeah.
And can we all talk about the elephant in the room? That guy that's over there in the bay that's just like talking to those kids. Like, I think Spielberg was telling us something that guy needed to be unalived. Was he
Yes.
not a little bit creepy?
Yeah.
Was
He's
he
like,
like,
hey boys, you all doing okay over there? Pull in your
hey, what's going
yeah.
on, little guys?
You gotta pull out your jib. Pull your jib out. Let your jib. I'm like, guy, like, and he's in like this little shoebox boat. Like, the thing is this big, and I'm like, yeah,
but
the young fellas need any help? I'm like,
the way, and this is what's terrifying, is he gets capsized,
yep.
and then the way he slowly gets pulled under,
Mm-hmm.
and then again, imagery. You don't see it happen. He gets pulled under, and then his leg just floats under,
Mm-hmm.
and then just the shock and the trauma. Like, just everything and how it works in that scene is just, again, it just, the mastery of filmmaking. Like, Brody runs, tries to save his kid, and gets in the water and everything like that, and how that guy gets pulled under and everything, and then as the sharks going by and Brody's kids are watching it, and like, I can just imagine it at that age,
Mm-hmm.
watching a 25-foot shark who just ate someone probably 10 feet away from me,
Yep.
and I'm like, I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
I'm done. And
Yeah.
then the shock and fear, I'm not moving.
Right.
Like, I'm toast if he wanted to.
Yeah.
Like, what is your thought at that moment? Like, there's nothing. I
Yeah.
have nothing for you.
Yeah, like, and this was kind of funny that this is really the first time that we see. I mean, we've seen Finn, and I think there was the one scene where you see, when she's like shark in the estuary, and you kind of see some Finn, but this is the first time we've seen the shark relatively up close. Whenever the guy's trying to climb on the boat, and you kind of get the shark on its side coming in, and you see the mouth open. And it was funny because Spielberg wanted to show the shark a lot in this movie, but they had so many problems, like you mentioned, with this animatronic shark and the salt water, and having issues with it malfunctioning, that we don't really see it. And I think we're an hour into this movie, almost, of over halfway into this movie before. But I think it worked worked for him, because it's more of that whole, what you're not seeing, the old horror tropes. It's like, it's not showing everything, it's what you don't see, it's what's lurking in the shadows, or in this case, what's lurking under the ocean, right? That makes it almost more terrifying, like, because you don't know where it is, when it's going to pop up. But yeah, this scene was unbelievable, how you've got the guy in the boat, and you can see behind him the shark coming in, but nobody sees it. So you're kind of sitting there, like, to your point, like, move, like, it's right fucking there. And then, like, it flips him over, and then, yeah, you don't see the attack, but you see the kind of the aftermath with the leg. That was it's is brilliant. And yes, the panic in the little boy's eyes of like, all right, like Jesus take the wheel, like we're done here. Like I've got no control over what's happening next. And then I like how they did, where like he was in shock. Like she's like, is he dead? His mom, and no, he's just in shock. um I mean, I would be too, to 100%. So, and this is kind of where the movie shifts, I think, into that third act, because I think at this point there's no denying things. Like we just had hundreds of people on a beach watch this happen, right? The mayor's kids were on this beach, which I think, when he approaches him at the hospital and he's yelling at him, he's like, sign this fucking paper, we're closing these beaches down, we're paying Quint to kill the fucking shark, we're done with this. And the of course the mayor, I like how like they try to make you feel sorry, because the mayor's like, my kid was on that beach too. Motherfucker, if you had listened the first place, nobody's kids would have been on this beach and we wouldn't be in this situation. So, like, first of all, and I know we're like fast forwarding to the second movie where this asshole is still the mayor. How does this asshole get elected again? Is my question. Like, maybe that's where the mob ties from the book come in, because this guy would never have been reelected.
Well, and that's where you almost kind of feel like the shift too, where like Brody had been the scapegoat for the majority of the movie,
Yep.
and finally it's like the shift. It's like Brody,
Vindication.
yeah, Vindication becomes kind of like the hero. Like, all right, I got to step up. My kid now was almost a victim. Like,
Yep.
we're going to get Quint and we're going to go out on a manhunt. And he's actually leading this manhunt. And
Yep.
that is, like you said, the vindication that he needed and the shift. And it definitely, this is the start of the third act for sure.
Yeah, yeah, and this is the best act. It's the best part of the movie for me, is now you've got Quint, Brody, and Hooper teaming up, and you got this trio that's headed out to capture and kill this shark. And I think it's it's the most fun part of the movie for sure. And what's even better is that like you have these scenes when they're preparing to go out, and Quint is barking out his order. He's like, I need 1 case of apricot brandy, 1 case of Israeli caviar, and don't forget the color television. And like, he's like, Hooper, tie this knot. He's like, let me see your hands, Hooper. He's like, you've got city hands, Mr. Hooper. Been counting money your whole life. Like, it's these scenes between the two of them. Come to find out that Richard Dreyfuss and Robert Shaw hated each other, and they got into multiple like altercations on set. And Spielberg was like, yeah, Shaw would call Richard Dreyfuss fat the whole time, call him a fat boy, and then Dreyfuss threw Shaw's liquor bottle out into the ocean, and we had to separate them. And so it made like the tension that was on screen very real, and it would, like, you saw it and you're like, these guys don't like each other in the movie. It comes across a little too realistic, because they really didn't care for each other in real life, which is funny. And I know Dreyfuss, I think, has turned out to be kind of a piece of shit in real life, in real life, from what I'm hearing. But when they talked to him, and he's like, "Yeah, me and Shaw did not get along," like confirmed a lot of this. It made for great movie. We'll say that it made for great tension within the film.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's again talking about the things behind scenes, like and more things that we can talk about. But yeah, Shaw was obviously an alcoholic, and again, famously what they said was he was a fantastic talent and a great person if he didn't have a drink, but every day he had to have a drink.
Yep.
And now leading into that, and I'm sure we're going to definitely focus on this as a major next part of our talk, but this also leads into the probably one of the most iconic scenes in the movie, the USS Indianapolis,
Yeah.
which Shaw thought how that scene should be filmed is because in the script it said that they were drinking late at night, so he went into that take, the first take, drunk, and it was almost unrecognizable, and it caused friction between him and Spielberg,
Mm.
and it caused him that night to apologize. And the next time, the one that's on screen, he did in one take, and he almost did it masterfully, as we all see.
Yeah. 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 We'll
So
talk about that one. So we've got the we've got the three heroes, we'll call them, and they're heading out to sea with all of their equipment. And I think one of the if the USS Indianapolis is the epitome of like the best monologue I've seen maybe ever. I think one of my favorite scenes is whenever they're putting the anti-shark cage onto the boat. and and he's got this cage, this big metal cage, and Dreyfus is character Hooper is like, yeah, what's and then Quint goes, what's this? And he goes, anti-shark cage, and he was like, huh, anti-shark cage, huh? He was like, you go in the cage, cage goes in the water, you go in the water, sharks in the water. And he's like, yep. And he goes, farewell and adieu to you, fair Spanish ladies. Like, you start singing that song. And I'm like, this is hilarious because he's just like mocking him, like basically being like, bro, there's a 25-foot shark out there, and you're going to
Yep.
get into this little fucking. It's a plaything for this shark, and we've seen it in like real life with like Shark Week on Discovery. These shark cages, they're titanium or steel or whatever. That's a big ass animal, and you see him getting attacked all the time. And I'm just like, maybe not the best idea, but that scene where they're loading up always cracks me up because he's basically like, yeah, you get in there, you're gonna die.
And the continual jabs too, like oh, all this nice expensive equipment, like oh, next time, Brody, ask me how to untie that knot, and da da
Yeah.
da da. And it's like it just shot like the little comedic timing that was placed throughout that scene with all three of them. And like you said, the
Mm-hmm.
tension was so real throughout that movie. And then
100%.
again, you find out why. And it just like, it works so beautifully. Like, it's like these three men on a boat where none of them have any common ties
Right.
and they're all forced with one common goal.
Yep.
And
That's what made it work. You got like alcoholic boat captain, transplant sheriff who hates the ocean, and then like an Oceanic Institute like shark lover, right? So like it's like when three unlikely friends get together to hunt a shark. Like, which is exactly what it is, but it works so beautifully like you mentioned. And so they go out and they're trying to catch this shark, and I just love the interaction. It's like three guys who aren't supposed to be here, almost like on a fishing expedition, right? Like, they took that, it was like freaking Gilligan's Island. Like they on that frightful like trip that they set out to, but they get out there and they're setting everything up, and then okay, we've got the shark. You see the shark, they're chumming the waters, and then you get what's probably the most iconic quote from the movie, where the shark pops his head out, chomp chomp chomp, and then goes back down, and only Brody sees it. And he's like, I think you're going to need a bigger boat, which was completely not part of the script. And it just kind of came out, and it turned out to be an iconic line. And then, you know, we've got the scene where they see the shark, and finally it's like not what's the word I'm looking for? It's not like we kind of know it's there, and they see it kind of swimming alongside the boat. And you get those shots where they're up on like the side of the boat in the crow's nest, and you see the length of it in the water, and they're like, that shark's got to be 20 feet long. And then like, Quint's like, that's a 25-footer at least. Like, and you're getting you're kind of starting to feel the gravity of the situation that they're in, where this animal is as long as this boat is. Okay. And they got those barrels, right? They start shooting. The Quint's idea is like, you got the harpoon gun, you're going to shoot these big yellow air-filled barrels, and that'll bring him up to the surface, and then we'll be able to capture him and get him into land. And we start to see that things aren't exactly what they seem, because one barrel takes it straight down, no problem. Two barrels, three barrels. And I think that Spielberg does a great job with the barrels, because like the barrels become that feeling of dread and anxiety. Like every time that barrel pops back up, you're like, oh shit, it's just Bob in there. Like, why isn't it moving? What's going on? And so I think that was done beautifully. And this leads us into the scene you're talking about, where they hit him with a few barrels. The sun's setting. They haven't seen anything. We don't know where it's at. We're just kind of putting around waiting for something to happen, and they decide to have some drinks. And the story of the USS Indianapolis, which I agree with you. I used to know most of like that dialogue almost by heart. Um, but it was amazing. Like, he tells this story of, because they're comparing scars, right? That's how it started. He's like, "No, that's a dogfish. Look at that." Puts his leg up on the table, and he's like, "What's this one?" Is a scar on his arm. And he said, "What is that tattoo?" It says "mother." And like you see it in Shaw's face where he like puts his hand on Hooper's, and he's like, "No, that's the USS Indianapolis." And you see immediately Hooper's like, "Wait, you were on the Indianapolis?" And you get the whole story, which I think is like fitting that it's like a real story that happened in
Yep.
real life with, the USS Indianapolis took two torpedoes from a Japanese sub. They all went in the water, and I forget the actual count. I think he said it was 800 of us went in the water or something, and then 2 days, a day and a half later, they pulled 100 of us out or whatever the count was. He's like, sharks took the rest, 1942. So essentially they were on the boat that delivered the bomb, the Hiroshima bomb, that ended up being dropped on Japan, and they were returning. It was a covert operation, so nobody, there was low communication. They weren't going to be reported missing, and so that's why it took so long to send the rescue planes. But um, the dialogue of him explaining like the screams, hearing his buddies in the water around him screaming from shark attacks, and I think at the time that, correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't it the oceanic black tip shark that was in the real story? Do you remember? It was a different shark.
I don't. I thought he said, man, I'm like you. I watched it twice
Me too.
preparing for this podcast, but I thought he said a tiger shark, but I could be wrong because I know that's what they pulled out of
Hmm.
the ocean in the earlier in the movie. But you know what's great. See, I don't remember.
So it says here, I'm just going to quick Google. So it's the real thing was out of almost 1,200 crew members, only a 316 survived. Most
Wow.
survivors died from shark attacks, dehydration, and salt poisoning. So probably wasn't all sharks. To your point, it probably wasn't just one type of shark. I'm sure there were multiples, right? And then obviously dehydration being out in the ocean. But like just the idea, think about like you're like just floating along, and
Yep.
then like all of a sudden he's like, oh, it was like an hour or so before we saw the first shark. And the story about his buddy from Cleveland that he thought was asleep. He's like he had been bit in half by the
Yep.
below the waist, and he's just bobbing there like a freaking fishing lure.
Well, again, the whole changing in tone that we've talked about in this movie, like, they're all sitting there and it starts out with scars and, you know, and then they kick their legs up and they're all laughing and like, oh, I'll drink to your leg. I'll drink to your leg. And then you have the little silly, awkward moment. And like, it looks like Brody had an appendectomy. So he looks at his scar and he's
Yeah,
like, well, I guess I'm not going to say anything. And then he's like, well, what's that? Like you said, what's that on your arm? And, it starts the story and,
it's
they're all
lighthearted.
laughing. Yeah. And it's lighthearted. And then it goes to very chilling. And, Shaw just again, just so masterful in his delivery and everything. And then just in like just buddy form, it's like you're sitting there with your buds and they drop something like and you're drinking. It's like, all right, well, let's change the tone back. He sings his song, and then Hooper lightens it up even more. They all sit down, have another drink, and then here we go.
Yeah, that's
And
that's the best. I love how it like to your point. We talked like went from lighthearted to chilling, almost back to lighthearted, right?
yep.
Because we get that whole scene. Show me the way to go home. I'm tired and I want to go to bed. They're all singing, and then as they're singing and having a good time, boom, boom, you're seeing the side of the boat just get hit and hit, and you kind of see Shaw notices that something's wrong, and then he's like, "Mr. Hooper, it's time to it's time to move." And so we kind of see the prep for this final showdown, this final countdown with the shark, and the barrels pop back up, and I mean, you got this everything in the scene from like he's trying to shoot it with the handgun. Like we're not making any trouble. We're not making any progress here. And we've got the whole scene. And earlier in the film, Quint made a comment like how the shark will shake you like a rag doll, chew you up, swallow you whole. And it was funny because that was total foreshadowing kind of to how he went down, right? So we the scene where the shark And this, now listen, this is 1975. This is an animatronic shark that they've had nothing but problems with. And it did look kind of funny. Like the shark almost like hops, jumps out of the water and like and lands on the back of the boat, and the boat tilts down, and you see Brody grab onto something so he doesn't slide down, and you see Quint grabbing, and he grabs a hold, but then there's those damn air tanks that Hooper had to have that small falls and hits his hand. He lets go and he ends up in the jaws of Bruce the shark, which I thought was iconic because remember Quint's giving him all this shit. Oh, what do you need all this high tech bullshit for? Like blah blah blah, and that kind of ends up being his demise. You know, the
Yep.
air tank hits his hand, and he falls into the shark. And that scene, it still gets me because you see like that sheer panic of him. And remember, he in the story of the USS Indianapolis, he said, "I'll never put on a life jacket again." You kind of got all these leading things, kind of telling you that like Quint's not going out. Like if he's going out, he's going out like in a kind of in a flurry of bullets, so to speak, which he kind of did because the shark ended up getting him. He's got that scene where he's basically being bit at the waist, and he's got that big like machete, and he
Yep.
stabs the shark, and sure enough, the shark's just thrashing, and you can kind of see but the screams, man, it's the whole, it's like everything about like building tension and fear and panic. Spielberg and the team like this crafted that masterfully, and you see Quint get kind of dragged away, right? And this is all after, which I think we kind of skipped over a little bit, was whenever um, Hooper went down in the shark cage. So Hooper
Yeah.
goes down in the shark cage because he's like, I got this. I forget what it was, sodium dichloride, some kind of thing he was going to inject into the mouth because the hide was too thick of the shark. So he's going to try to jam it in the mouth and kill the shark. Shark attacks the cage, and Hooper, we think, gets away at this point.
That scene again, again the tension. Like this guy rips that cage apart from the get. And of course, Hooper, he ain't used to doing this stuff.
No,
First thing from the get, he drops that thing. The first time he hits the cage, he drops that spear, and we're like, oh, this guy is screwed.
toast.
He rips that cage apart. And here he goes with his little pig sticker, and he's sitting here. He is stabbing a 25-foot shark in the eyeball and just, you know, while he demolishes that cage.
Yeah,
And, you know, Quint, again, this is right before, yeah, he pops up and they're pulling up that cage. And when they pop it up, you can tell this is just not going to go well for them. And they pop that cage up. And this is when Jaws is like, this is what, again, the whole time, Quint, Hooper, and Brody feel like they've been hunting this shark while Jaws is so intelligent that he's been setting them up the whole time.
yeah, he's hunting
Like,
them.
it's brilliant. I mean, it's just, and then he pops up on that boat, and that scene with Quint is just brutal. I
Hmm.
mean, that final chomp, I mean, the blood spurting out of his mouth, and you just
Yep.
see him just like but he goes out like a boss. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
If someone splits me down the middle and I'm still putting a machete in the side of I mean, that guy goes out like a boss. Like,
And
good for him.
right. And I think at that point, like we've kind of like at first you're like, oh, Quint's just like this, like he's a drunk asshole, right? But
Yep.
as you've gotten to know the character and like through the Indianapolis monologue, you're rooting for him.
Yep.
You're rooting for them, and so then it's kind of like you're finally like starting to root for these characters, and then they snatch one away, right? Seemingly snatch two away. We don't know what happened to Hooper, and then now Quint's gone, and now it's just Chief Brody who hates the ocean, who doesn't know dick all about being on a boat or being a captain, and the boat's going down, right? The boat's sinking, and so we're kind of at a point now where we're like, that's a wrap. You got a fish, right? A 25-foot animal. You're in his territory and you're about to be in the water. I'd say the advantage goes to the shark in this scenario, right? So the boat's going down. I mean, at this point, it kind of seems like all is lost.
Yep.
So I think, and you see Martin grab the rifle and kind of start like doing what any normal person would do in this case. Let's get to the highest point of this boat while it's sinking, right? So I stay out of the water. He climbs up to the crow's nest, and I think this was the perfect example of like foreshadowing. Earlier in the movie, whenever Brody's looking at that book of all the shark attacks, and you see the one where the shark's biting the boat, and there's an air tank in his mouth. I don't know if you noticed that before, but then we see Bruce come up and he's charging the boat, and Brody's like, "All right, well, I'm gonna go down fighting then." So he's shooting at the shark, and obviously that a rifle's not going to do anything against a shark that size, you know what I mean? And then you kind of see the air tank that he shoved in his mouth earlier when Bruce came in after Quint. He shoved the air tank in his mouth, and he's of course you get that smile, you son of a bitch. Last boom hits the air tank explodes, and Bruce the shark goes up in bits, right? Hooray, like to the victors. And I think that this was fun too, how he um you think, oh, finally, like we're calming down, we've killed the shark, and then you see the bubbles, and everyone starts to panic again, and it's our boy Hooper, right? He had just been like hiding like under the water, like damn you, Hooper, I did all the work, you just like dipped out for a minute, Quint died, and now you're back.
Well, and you know what, and I want to circle back just a little bit, and I think that's one of the most glorious uh finishes to a creature ever. Like, I mean, just how he explodes in it. But I want to circle back to one of the biggest cinema mistakes ever in a movie
Yeah,
is like is when there's that final panic and Quint is finally like, I don't know what to do,
yeah,
and he almost causes the demise of all three of them. Is He's like, okay, you can tell he doesn't know, he doesn't have an answer, and he's like, okay, we're gonna go back, we're Brody, we're finally going back, I admit I'm wrong, and we're gonna get to the shallows, and we're gonna drown him, we're gonna
drown him.
drown him in the shallows, and he literally burns out the motor,
Yeah,
and he in essence just stuck them out there in the middle of the ocean,
yeah,
and it causes the final showdown. Like,
yeah.
what are you doing, Quint? What are you doing?
I think this is
And
just like his hubris, right?
right,
His
right. And I'm like, I was like, man, we like you, Quint. What are you doing? Like,
like you
and
could have cut those barrels, gone in, like regrouped. Like he's out here. We have evidence of this. He's hooked to the barrel still. Like we could have like regrouped and maybe it been a different outcome, but it wouldn't have been as fun of a movie.
right, right. But yeah, I mean, that ending was just perfect. I mean, it just the way they did it, the final showdown,
Yep.
and and I what I liked was that at least he's a cop, so at least he knows how to shoot. I like that he did like 4 or 5 missed shots, like,
Yeah.
and he's barreling down, like,
Yeah.
he can come down on you, and that final shot, he's like, yeah, the iconic, like you said, the one-liners, the quotes in this movie, and that final one, and then just the way Bruce blows up is
Mm-hmm.
just amazing. I love it. It's over the top, and
Yep.
it's brilliant. So
Yep.
it's
I
such a, and then it's like, oh yeah, Hooper comes up, and it's like, hey, let's grab some floaties and or the barrels. They
the
grab the
barrels.
barrels, and he's like, the final line, I used to hate the ocean.
Yeah, exactly. And they're swimming for shore as all like the seagulls are like eating bits of Bruce, like it was great. I was fantastic. And I think that that's like the perfect fitting ending. And to your point, and we won't talk too much about it. I know we could probably talk about this movie for hours and hours, but you know, this is one where I don't feel like we needed any sequels ever. This was like it was a perfect film. And while I do enjoy Jaws 2, and I think it was definitely like a step down from the original, it was still fun. But then they kind of went on and did Jaws 3, The Revenge, which starred freaking, wasn't it Michael Caine?
Yep.
Dude,
Yeah.
amazing actor. I'm like, this is just a terrible. And then you got what's is it Jaws 3D? That one was so bad.
Or wait, Jaws? Wait, no, Jaws for the Revenge was with Michael Caine on the
Oh,
island and the original
Mom.
mom.
Yeah.
And Jaws 3D was with the two brothers in SeaWorld
See,
with
yeah, the
Louis
water
Gossett
park.
Jr. Yeah, in that
Yes.
one, yeah.
They were all, I mean, listen, I've watched them all, but obviously, like, this set the tone for, this is 4 years before Alien. This is, I mean, this is the quintessential. I mean, I'm sure that there's other, if you want to talk creature features, where you can go all the way back to, Lon Chaney and the Wolf Man and some of the black and white features, and those will always hold a special place. But as far as like setting fear into like an entire generation of people, like Jaws was one of a kind. To your point, like anyone like in the 70s that was like from the age of, you know, you had 8, 10 years old kids in theaters watching this movie being like that are scarred for life to this day about getting in the ocean. So I think that like as for Spielberg, as many problems as they had, and he was like, I had nightmares about this movie after we were done filming. Like there were so many problems, and for it to end up the way it did. And like, dude, you created something in movie history. And I'm sure you watched it. Remember that they did the movies that made us?
Yep.
Like they did a whole episode on Jaws and all the different challenges and stuff of Jaws and how it was supposed to be this and ended up being that. And it's like, dude, how can you just had everything go your way? Like all the terrible things you thought were happening, and you're like, dude, you ended up with a freaking masterpiece that will never be topped. Like kudos to that. And I think it's just, and it's also in my opinion, how practical effects, man. I'll say it over and over and over. I love CGI. We were able to do incredible things with movies today, but there is still something to be said for Jaws, for Aliens, for The Thing, for these movies that utilize keeping it as close to being real as you can. Some things I just realized, like, yeah, the shark. But see, here's the thing: as bad as I felt the shark looked at certain points in the movie, the recent shark movies, I'm like, what's the last good shark movie?
Right.
The
I mean, like,
Shallows?
yeah. I mean, like, let me just hate on one recently. I could not stand Under Paris, and you're watching that CGI, and I'm like, is this a joke? Am I being punked right now?
Yeah.
And I always, and it's sad because when a movie's so iconic, I pit it up against a movie. I'm like,
Right?
Jaws, this movie, and I'm
Yep.
like,
Yeah.
Jaws is that it's that level for me.
Yeah, fair,
So,
fair or unfair, I do the same thing. And like I thought they're like I said, the Shallows with what's her name, Blake Lively, I thought was pretty good
yep,
overall. Under Paris, I thought was a fun movie, not a good movie. Like I was like, okay, that was like a fun like popcorn watch, like cool. I had really high hopes because of what's his name that did that Xavier Gens. Who directed it, who was in attached to Frontiers, which is an all-time banger.
love
But
that movie.
in a different type of movie. But yeah, like I had high hopes for it. But yeah, like I feel like for every Jaws, there's a billion like wannabes that you got like what's the last breath, like there's the one where like the plane crashed and they were under the water recently. You just go on Tubi and look up shark. There's Ouija shark, there's ghost shark, there's two-headed shark attack, there's shark. I mean, some of these are just bad, and they're meant to be B movies, so I get you're not trying to be Jaws, but like that's the one thing where I'm like, man, I want another good shark movie. And I
Yep,
don't know if it will ever be done again just because no one's going to build a 25-foot animatronic shark. They're all going to use CGI. And
yep,
so, unless you nail the CGI, which is difficult to do, I just don't know if they're going to. And the story itself of Jaws, like to your point, was simplistic but believable. Like
yep.
sharks up the Seine River in Paris, come on, like it's never going to happen. Even like we're not talking about sharks, but even like Lake Placid, which I still consider to be an all-time great creature feature, a saltwater crocodile being up a lake in Maine. You know what I mean? Like I appreciate what they tried to do here, but I just like there's a few like my only guilty pleasure is freaking Alligator, right? From 1980 with Robert Forster. I think
I
that's
love that movie.
because that one's using a fun urban legend of flushing down a baby alligator in the sewers of New York. That's like an
Yep.
urban legend, and I think that one worked. But like, man, Jaws is, yes, Jaws is in a class all by itself. It always will be. And I'm just glad we got a chance to sit here and talk about it. We could probably just keep talking about it, and it would like lead into other like avenues of creature features. But I'll give us some time back to everybody's Sunday. But those are my final thoughts on Jaws. If you're listening or watching and you haven't somehow seen Jaws by this point in your life, you need to do yourself a favor. It's not quite as good as William, but it will change your life. Go watch Jaws. If you haven't seen it in a while, I urge you to give it another watch and look out for some of the things we talked about today. Some of the interactions between Quint and Hooper, and like see if you can see some of that tension from behind the scenes and see some of these things like Matthew mentioned with the hand, right, being buried. Like there's some things that you learn as you discuss movies that you kind of like go back and give it a rewatch. It's definitely worth your time.
Yeah, I agree. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on again, Ryan. I appreciate it. And hopefully next time we have David to join us again.
Yeah, yeah, we'll do this again. I would love to like pick some more, we can stick with the creature, aspect and like, kind of going along with your creature madness theme that you've developed on TikTok. So if you guys aren't on TikTok and you will get on there, give Matthew a follow. You can find him at Horror Madness 0055. He goes live all the time and he talks horror movies. I'm gonna start doing some more lives. He was kind enough to join us today. And we're gonna keep doing this from time to time and just talk some of our favorite horror movies. So thanks for joining, Matthew. I appreciate it. And you're welcome back anytime, brother.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
All right, we'll talk to you all later. Have a good Sunday. See you, bud.
Bye.